morning, everyone. I'm Poornima Sardana. I'm a museums consultant from New Delhi, and I work on my initiative called Museums of Hope, which is to rethink and reimagine museums for well-being of people and environment. I'm going to share with you today an ideation which is still in the conceptualization stage. Um, However, I'm also going to share with you my journey that has led me to that concept, and I'm hoping that I could receive from you your feedback and guidance on how to make this concept more relevant and practical and meaningful for different audiences. I'm just going to take a moment to share the slides with you now. Yeah, my presentation is called Opening Windows because I feel like that's what I've been doing. I've been opening windows to let in some hope and well being while understanding how museums could be relevant for diverse audiences. So my journey started in 2013. This is when I was a volunteer at the National Museum in New Delhi, and I used to always hire this auto rickshaw with this driver called Niaz Bhai. And Niaz Bhai would always make fun of me, and he would ask, "Why do you work in museums? Why don't you do something relevant like real estate or something?" And as funny as that would sound to me, I would also invite him inside the museum. Then why don't you come in and let me give you a tour, or let me tell you why this space matters, and perhaps you will feel that connect as well when you go with someone you know and are comfortable with. And it's not as if National Museum has an expensive ticket. It's just rupees 10. At least at that point it was just rupees 10, and it was air conditioned, and in that heat that was quite inviting as well. But Niaz Bhai would never come in, and in fact a lot of people like Niaz Bhai who belong to particular segments of society that were already feeling alienated from many such different cultural spaces and experiences, they would always say the same thing to me, that museums are not for people like us. And that would bother me a lot. And I would wonder why are museums not seeming relevant to these people? Why are they not touching their lives? Why are they not important for them? And one of the most significant steps that I feel is that uh, as museum professionals, perhaps we haven't made that effort to include people, to make them feel like they matter to us and that museums cater to them. I'll move ahead in time now. I'll because this is the query that I've since been trying to answer in my entire journey as a museum professional. Um, and so in 2015, this is now a cold evening in New York City. I was part of the college committee at the Rubin Museum of Himalayan Asian Art, and we were organizing this event for young adults. And as part of this event, my peer and I were managing this table where we were offering a space for reflection or pause through coloring, and we were offering these printed sheets and pencil colors for people to use. However, their entire evening had such enticing offerings because there was this fun tour, there was treasure hunt, there were drinks, music. We weren't expecting a huge turnout at this table. To our pleasant surprise, on this Friday evening in New York City, a lot of young adults indeed wanted to just sit and color. And it was a very peaceful collection of people sitting together and sharing that moment. To the extent that we had to actually keep on adding tables to accommodate more and more people. And towards the end of the night, when we still had some people sitting with us, a man entered that space. Who I immediately stereotyped into a biker guy because he had this robust personality. He was wearing a particular jacket, he had tattoos, and I immediately thought, oh, he's a rough and tough guy. He's not going to like an activity like this. It's too simplistic for him. Nonetheless, he joined us when I explained to him what we were doing, and he sat right next to me. And here's this person who I assumed to be this robust personality, um, a very strong exterior. who took this tub of a pencil. It was blue in color, and he just started coloring like a child, and he kept doing it. And I could see his face change, I could see the shift, and he looked more gentle and fragile than he had when I had seen him before. And he just kept muttering to himself that this is all that I needed to do today. I just needed to color. And um, as moving as it was also inspiring, because I realized the potential that evening of museums as contact zones, as James Clifford would say, and where um, a person with whom I would have not connected with at a deeper level in perhaps another setting could sit next to me and slowly reveal his vulnerabilities and his gentle presence as a human. And I could also touch his life as a more compassionate human than I otherwise would have. And if this does not add on to well being, then what really does? We have to be acknowledging our vulnerabilities, opening up our vulnerabilities, and sharing them without fear in a community of support and care. And the museum made it possible that evening. Now, this was radically different to the experience Niaz Bhai had been having, where he felt a socio cultural, intellectual barrier, where he sensed this apprehension in entering the space where he felt that people like him will not be accepted. Here, a person felt accepted. And very often in India, we have this myth that people say, oh, we do not have a museum going culture. But that's not true. That's really not true. We have had temple towns, and we've had such rituals, practices, ceremonies centered around a display and an exhibition of some sort, even if it was religious. So we cannot deny that we have a culture of going, seeing, connecting. We do have that. And if you go to any landmark museum in any city during the holidays, you will find local tourists from around India in these museums. So it is not the lack of a museum going culture. I assume it is a lack of belonging in the museum culture. There is no sense of belonging to that space. We visit the space, but do we feel something? Do we feel connected? Do we feel like I am a human and I've been acknowledged and recognized as a human? Have I felt this in this space? I doubt that experience happens for many people. I don't think so. I've shared an example here of Parag Kashi Tandel, who is a representative of who's a part of the Koli community, which is a fisherman community in Mumbai, and he had this experience in one of the museums in Mumbai where he felt like, why is my community not being shown as part of the history of the city? And so he started his own Tandel Fund of Archives, through which not only have they been archiving and sharing their own culture and their history and their literature, but at the same time, they've also been creating these different pop up spaces where other people of the city can come in contact with this culture and connect with them, thereby recognizing their presence and their important role in the environmental well being. So, uh, here where Parag is, emphasizing upon the importance of belonging through representation and a diversity of narratives, I also realized that belonging comes in ownership, and ownership of not just the space or the archive or the museum in that case, but ownership of the conceptualization itself of the museum, ownership of the process, how it functions, how it operates, why, what is the purpose of this museum, ownership of that thinking, of that concept, which is what we experienced at the Rajasthan Rural Arts Program Hub Museum in Jaipur under Faith Singh's guidance, where on recognizing that our stakeholders are these folk musician communities of Rajasthan and their families, and we realized that it was significant to involve them in that entire process of imagining what that museum would be like and what kind of programs would be offered. Uh, and then again, involving the people who would be coming to the museum as to what kind of programs would be valuable to them in their lives. And hence, we had an entire eclectic range of programs which were extremely meaningful to very different kinds of people in different ways. And it allowed us to make this space where the folk musicians were no more just represented as frozen identities in a display, but they were actual facilitators, they were active participants, they were decision makers in this entire process and building their own relationships with the different communities which were going to engage with and connect with the museums. And those relationships could go beyond the museum. uh, I also realized that belonging and that sense of being part of the space can also come through just laughter and playfulness, because museums are often so authoritative and so intimidating that people, especially people who have experienced them earlier during their school days when they just came in this serpentine queue, when they just went in and came out quietly without really engaging deeply with the space, they might face this inhibition in really sensing a belonging with a place like a museum. So through the museum's Mazedar collective, Mazedar means fun, along with my peer Anaja Joshi, we conducted experiments in non-intimidating experiences for very different audiences. So it could be an improv workshop for the elderly in the President's Museum. It could be a science fiction tour for young adults at the National Science Center. It could be this intergenerational group that was solving mysteries in the National Rail Museum. And I realized that just this ease and comfort that comes in with humor, with acknowledging people's own ideas and letting them interpret the different artworks, letting them make sense of what they're seeing, a new layer of meaning being projected by them. All of these all of these different things came together to make them have a sense of community in that space, and b just feel comfortable. I guess for well-being, one of the essential things is just to be comfortable in that space, and laughter and playfulness can play a very important role in doing so. Belonging also very strongly was felt by groups when we really acknowledged and recognized their lived experiences. Some of the pictures that I've shared here are from the Hugaheim series, which is our series where we're trying to experiment if people can have a sense of comfort and home in the museum with a community which is supportive and caring and is not harsh or judgmental towards them. And one of the groups that once came to this Hugaheim series was a group of cancer survivors. And when we say we acknowledge their lived experiences, it's because we don't treat people who come to these experiences as empty vessels who we need to download a lot of information for, but rather we treat them as people with valuable lived experiences, valuable context, uh, valuable insight and interpretation. And we uh, like to facilitate the experience in a way that before learning new information, it is their interpretation, their first response, emotional response, their connection with what they're looking at, what they're feeling, uh, that comes out. So a lot of space is created for anecdotes, for maybe very difficult kind of conversations, maybe traumatic experience that they've not been able to talk about, or something beautiful and inspirational that they've gone through in their own life. Um, and very often in these series, the community is not of people who've met before, and they're usually people who are strangers. But we've seen such beautiful exchange amongst women in the group, whether it's about pregnancy, whether it's about family, whether it's about tying a sari. So it's been very different things that we could touch upon. Um, and create that space where people felt, even if it's momentary, even if it's not a long term, long lasting, but in that 1 hour, 1.5 hour, or 2 hours at times, we've seen that people sense that they belong, and that sense of belonging, we firmly believe, adds on to their well-being. In fact, one of the cancer survivors who came in one of the Hugaheim series had shared with us that, by not controlling where the conversation is going, and by just using these murals as an initiation of a dialogue which is organic, we made space for them to be able to share what they could not even tell their families. And a lot of people might be wanting to say something like that, might be holding on a lot inside them, or there might be a lot of things that people go through which are not acknowledged, not heard of. And I feel that if that could be brought into our work as museum professionals, where we can't all be trained in psychology, we are not counselors, we are not psychotherapists, but we are humans, and we have all been through vulnerabilities. We've all been through the pandemic. We've all been through loss and grief and pain. So, if we can just make space for our own selves to be free to connect through vulnerability, that could lead to something incredible. So, as I mentioned, that we've all been in the pandemic. So, like many other professionals, I've also been experimenting with different kinds of digital offerings, as have been many museums, whether it's workshops, whether it's art therapy, music therapy, just learning resources, building community, fighting isolation, fear, anxiety, uncertainty. Um, Also, part of my work through Museums of Hope has been to create these different reflective series, again, responding from a space of vulnerability and sharing what is helping me with more people. Also, at the same time, working on museum dialogue series through which we were trying to create a knowledge pool to experiment what are the different ways in which museums can cater to well-being, and well-being not just limited to health, but well-being, it could be cultural, social, economic, environmental well-being as well. However, uh, no matter what kind of a positive response the series, the reflection, the different events or programs have had, I've also been disturbed over this past 1 year because where I could reach out to a great diversity of people before the pandemic through the museum events and experiences, digitally, I have been truly limited in the kind of outreach I have had. And who are the people who've been touched by my work? Who am I? Whose lives am I entering? And I'm only doing that for internet savvy, urban, digitally connected people with social media accounts who have the kind of a social circle where they will not feel the apprehension in accessing primarily English speaking. So it's definitely a very limited pool of people that I'm being relevant for through my work online. And I've been wondering what I can do to go beyond that, because I don't want my idea of public to be limited. Because, as how I started my story, is Niaz Bhai, the auto rickshaw driver, being touched by my work right now? He's not. So I'm not relevant to him at all. So I might have realized that my purpose, uh, and as have many museums, realize that their purpose is to cater to well-being, or well-being as well, along with the other aspects they might have been looking at. But have I really been able to make a significant change in who I realize are my public and how I reach to them? And um, so the assumptions here in asking these questions are also that a inclusion should be a significant goal or a primary goal for museums if we want to cater to well-being, because well-being of a few cannot ascertain the well-being of the greater diversity that we all are, and we all learned in the pandemic that it does not work this way. And also this rise in relevance that comes with catering to diverse audiences and their well-being, can this also then support institutions in their own meaningful growth? Because that myth that I earlier said is very prevalent, that we don't have a museum going culture, and that's why people don't care about museums. And very often when we have some sort of an accident or something goes wrong with the museum, we have only a very small set of people who will be part of the public outcry, and the rest would not be that involved, uh, because those museums have not been that intrinsic a part of their lives. And can this change through well-being? Can the realization that we can uh, reach out to so much more diversity of people and their lives, can this also change what these institutions mean to people, and hence have an impact on their future and the well-being of the institutions themselves? But I guess I'm digressing a bit here, so let me go back to my assumption that inclusion is a significant part of catering to well-being of people. uh, and how do I now include people who are not being reached by my work as a museum professional otherwise? One experiment that I had conducted in 2019, but it was a very small period of few months. It was with a very small number of people, so I cannot claim that it was a successful experiment in that sense. However, I can share the experience of it. So it was called Dunya Museum Scheme. um, this was when I was myself struggling with my cancer treatment. I was more or less isolated. I was limited to my room, and I really wanted to reach out to people. And I also wanted to understand, what do other people in isolation, or in a maybe elderly, maybe in palliative care, maybe recovering from something, or people who just live alone, and maybe cannot go out for some reason, cannot have social interactions, are not meeting more people. What kind of requirements do they have? What would they like to listen to? What would they like to hear? And that led to Dunya Museums Ki, where I would take a particular museum and a theme in a week, and then I would create an audio clipping around it where I would connect it with our lives. So the science museum would not be just the usual information and learning, which is essential and significant, that happens with science museums, but it was also about poetry. It was also about the realization of how we're all connected, and about the excitement of the realization, of how we're all connected through carbon or through star stuff. And so the intent was to, bring in these perspectives that can add more meaning to our lives, or make us reflect in ways that could offer us strength, that could offer us some beautiful reflection, that could offer some respite, some sort of solace, and at times could just offer melancholy, that does not disrespect the pain or suffering you might have in life, but at the same time also leaves a ray of hope. It also leaves space for you to bounce back, to move forward with it, with that pain. So um, Dunya Museumski was an interesting experiment, because I did this on WhatsApp. I realized that a lot of people, particularly say people who would be employed in our homes, people who would be driving the cabs, people who are working in the informal economy, a lot of those public who are actually not thought of in the mind of us museum professionals as our public, a lot of those people out there who should be our public are using WhatsApp, they're using YouTube. And if we can put content on these platforms in languages that are convenient for the people, more accessible for the people, then and content that connects to their lives, that brings more meaning to their lives, that addresses their issues, that addresses their aspirations, then are we not making place for people to feel included, for people to feel acknowledged, for people to feel heard, even without them talking to us directly? And if we're able to create that space for people to feel this way, are we then not, even if in a small way, catering to their well being? Are we not reaching out and just gently patting somebody on their back through this work? So, Dunya Museumscape primarily reached out to a lot of cab drivers because I used to be taking a cab to go to my hospital very often. It reached out to quite a few of this hospital staff. It went to people who I found on the roads randomly. I would just request people for their numbers and start sending these clips to them on WhatsApp. And initially, the response was slow, and I was a bit disheartened too. But eventually, very interesting responses started pouring in, like a thumbs up. People would say, "Very good, I enjoyed it." Somebody would send me back some or related audio or video, and or just a rose. But I think the most beautiful response that I got was from this group of children in this village in Himachal, which is far away from where I was, who through an NGO or some group of people who were teaching them got this audio, and they would receive this every week. And they sent back to me their own audio recordings explaining their, narrating their life in their village. And that for me, yes, I admit I don't have any impact evaluation, I don't have data, but that for me was hope. That for me was a sign that this should continue, because these are the people I would have never ever reached otherwise through my work, to what I had been doing until now. So if I can touch their lives in this small little way, let me continue doing so. And let's see where it goes, what it leads to. Someone somewhere has felt heard and they wanted to talk back and reach out to this person who had reached out to them. And I think that's a positive sign. Um, so building on these experiences of Dunya Museumski, because it was limited and for a few months, building on these reflective posts and engagement digitally that happened for the last 1 year throughout the pandemic. Also building on this learning of how inclusion is not just about footfall, or inclusion is not just about physical access, or reducing the prices of tickets, which are all very important and significant steps. But inclusion is also about creating a sense of belonging. And this is where I want to work, because that inclusion can then lead to well being. So now my ideation is to build on Dunya Museum scheme, and I want to start a podcast, which again would also be available on WhatsApp and YouTube, called Thoop Darshan, which means in Hindi, witnessing warm sunshine, and preferably the sunshine in the hills, as I associate that with hope and healing and resilience. As are all the hill folks, they are so resilient and so strong, and have to deal with such adversity and at the same time witness such extreme beauty. um, I again intend for it to be in Hindi initially, because that's the language I'm fluent in apart from English. Again, on WhatsApp, YouTube, and other platforms, social media, where I want to use art, cultural resources, literature, music, and bring it all together for these meaningful, short, meaningful reflections, contemplation on life, um, particularly through this experience of the pandemic. And we're still in the pandemic. India is still just recovering from this terrible, devastating second wave. So, particularly through this period of isolation and anxiety and fear and loss, and also of great strength and resilience. touching people in a way that it also offers emotional support, possibly collaborating with other local media or community radios if it's possible and if it seems aligned with their purposes, so that people uh, can can experience something beyond their isolation, which brings meaning to them and adds positively to their lives. While embracing my vulnerabilities and while acknowledging theirs. So that is the intent behind Thoop Darshan that I plan to begin in July. These would be weekly audio clippings. I intend to um send these to as many organizations and groups that I can so that it spreads widely and can reach very diverse audiences. I also intend to continue doing it for at least 6 months to be able to gauge some sort of response. Um, and if I do get that response, then I want to extend it further so that its impact can also be studied or understood in ways beyond these small windows of hope, like the audio clipping coming my way. Um, so this has been my journey in well-being, and this is my ideation. I'm very grateful to you for being patient enough to watch this video and listen to me, and for letting some sun in. And this is my email address, poornimasardana@gmail.com. I would be truly grateful to have your feedback and would be thrilled to collaborate with somebody who would also be interested in working on this. Thank you so much and take good care of yourselves.